Hello there! I hope you enjoyed my rewrite of the Book of Boba Fett. But now it's time for the breakdown, where we go over the original story and point out all the major flaws in it. And there are a lot of flaws, so many, that I limited myself to 13. 13 flaws I hope my rewrite fixed. Now, let's go over these flaws in order of appearance on the show. The comical way we thought Boba Fett died in Return of the Jedi left Star Wars fans disappointed for over a decade. We were disappointed because this badass character that we fell in love with in Empire Strikes Back died like he was in a Bugs Bunny cartoon. Then the expanded universe, that was canon, told stories of how Boba Fett fought his way out of the Sarlacc. It also told a story of how Boba Fett and the Sarlacc made a mental connection, and that's how he was able to free himself. Either way, the expanded universe told us how Boba Fett survived the Sarlacc. And then Disney decanonized the expanded universe so they could tell their own tales. And we once again were excited to see how Boba Fett escaped the Sarlacc. And what cool way did Disney come up with to have Boba Fett escape this beast? He did it by escaping. He decided he didn't want to be there anymore, burnt a hole in the side of the Sarlacc, and dug his way out. No resistance from the Sarlacc at all. I guess no one else thought of this. We know the Sarlacc's alive, because later on in the series, Boba Fett stupidly gets his slave one too close, and the Sarlacc attacks it. But the Sarlacc didn't even flinch when Boba Fett burnt it. The show doesn't tell us why it was so easy for Boba Fett to escape. Maybe that stormtrooper he saw gave him inspiration. So Boba Fett seeing a stormtrooper in the Sarlacc doesn't make any kind of sense. There weren't any stormtroopers on Jabba's sail barge, or on any of the skiffs. So that stormtrooper fell into the Sarlacc before Return of the Jedi. But even if he fell in right before this scene, he'd be much further down the digestive system than Boba Fett. And it'd be impossible for them to meet up. Especially since a few other of Jabba's henchmen were swallowed before Boba Fett was. So unless the Sarlacc has a separate stomach for its armored victims, which would be stupid, Boba Fett should have been surrounded by Jabba's other henchmen, not some random stormtrooper. And that stormtrooper looks like he's been dead for a long time. So besides the question, how did Boba Fett end up next to this stormtrooper, we have to ask how and when the stormtrooper got into the Sarlacc. We know the Empire didn't have a garrison of stormtroopers on Tatooine, and the last time we saw them on the planet was at the beginning of the original Star Wars. So is this one of Darth Vader's stormtroopers that got stuck in the Sarlacc's throat for over half a decade? Because that would be stupid. This bothers me, because shortly after they take Boba Fett's armor and leave him for dead, these exact same Jawas save Cobb Vanth and sell him Boba Fett's armor. Cobb Vanth is in a similar situation as Boba Fett, dying alone in the desert. Now you can say Cobb Vanth had something to barter with, and Boba Fett was easy to rob. But I'd make the argument that the Jawas should have known who Boba Fett was, even if these Jawas just stayed on Tatooine. Boba Fett is a well-known figure here. They should know exactly who he is, and that saving his life would be lucrative, since they demonstrated they're willing to save people by saving Cobb Vanth. And they could profit off of saving Boba Fett. I think it's out of the Jawa's character not to save Boba Fett. Speaking of out of character, let's talk about Boba Fett and the Tusken Raiders. Now, what do we know about the Tusken Raiders? The first Star Wars taught us that the Sand People were deadly marauders who rob and kill people. The Phantom Menace taught us that Tuskens like to shoot at passing vehicles for sport. Attack of the Clones taught us that Tusken Raiders viciously attack villages and kidnap, torture, rape, and enslave women. And The Mandalorian taught us that if you know sign language and have a common goal, the Tusken Raiders can be worked and reasoned with. So taking what we know about the Tuskens, why would they bother with a half-dead man lying in the sand? And not only bother with him, but nurse him back to health. I'm sure slaves are hard to come by in the desert, but when they come across Boba Fett, he hardly seems like the effort. But for no reason at all, they drag this dying man across the desert and give him food and water until he's well enough to work for them. And how do they keep the great Boba Fett captive? Could it be by keeping him in a large cage and guarding him with nothing but the toughest Tusken warriors? No, they tie him to a stick in the ground and have a little kid with a stick watch over him. On a side note, this show expects us to believe that Boba Fett sat outside in the desert with no protection for years. The Tuskens survive in the desert because they're covered from head to toe, protected from the sun. Boba Fett sitting out in the desert like this wouldn't even last a day. But I digress. This little kid and his dog just walk Boba Fett out into the desert, make him dig for rocks with water in them, then takes Boba back to camp and ties him back to the stick. And Fett just lets all this happen. They demonstrate in the show that Boba Fett can take down the dog, and he can easily outpower this kid. There's absolutely no reason for him to be captive at this point. But he lets the Tuskens enslave and torture him for years. That is, until one day they get attacked by the creature from the Clash of the Titans, and Boba Fett manages to kill the beast. And from that moment on, he's no longer a slave. Boba Fett's a member of the tribe. He didn't have to save the chieftain's daughter or bring water to the village. He just had to slave some creature from another movie. And the Tuskens respect him now. They teach Boba Fett how to fight with their weapons, and he teaches them how to ride a speeder bike. The Tuskens dress Boba Fett up in their robes and give him his own gaffy stick and teach him their cultural dances. Boba Fett becomes a Tusken and forgets about all that torturing and enslavement that he went through, just as easily as the Tuskens decided he was no longer a slave. Boba Fett decided that the Tuskens were good people, and none of it works, because the Tusken Raiders aren't good people, and nothing in this show shows us that they are. They are ruthless savages who rape and kill people, and who in this show tortured and enslaved Boba Fett. And Boba Fett is a ruthless mercenary who wouldn't fall in love with the people that tortured him. He'd want revenge until every last Tusken was dead. He would have been happy when he was burying their bodies, not sad and angry. I know they were going for a Dances with Wolves or Avatar vibe, but that story doesn't work when the hero is a ruthless killer and his adoptive family does horrible things to him. Why does Boba Fett take such offense when he sees spice, or hear that it's being dealt in Mos Eisley and Mos Espa? Fett's been in the Star Wars underworld his whole life. He's worked for the Hutts, who deal in spice. He must understand the place and value that spice has on the black market. And while I see him not doing spice or selling spice, He must have interacted with the business aspect of it. And we know he's seen worse than the effects drug has on a society. So why is he acting like Nancy Reagan all of a sudden? So what credentials did Boba Fett acquire that give him the confidence to call himself the Daimyo, whatever that damn word is? We'll just call him the boss of all of Mos Espa. All we know he did was shoot Bib Fortuna, which at most would give him control of Jabba's palace, not the whole damn city. But for some reason it works. Local crime bosses and business owners come and pay him tribute. Even the mayor, who wants to be the daimyo, the boss, the crime boss, takes Boba Fett seriously enough to send a representative. And then Boba Fett and Fennec Shand take to the streets, backed up only by the Gamorrean guards that they picked up at Jabba's palace, which, by the way, is the extent of their manpower. Boba Fett, Fennec Shand, and 2 Gamorreans. That's who they're gonna run a city and a criminal empire with. It's quite ridiculous. So Boba Fett goes to the local cantina and says he's the new boss, and without promise of protection or threat of violence. The owner fills Boba Fett's helmet with credits. No negotiation of terms. Just here's a bunch of money. Again, it's ridiculous. Then Boba Fett goes to let the mayor know who's in charge. A mayor who's already expressed that he's the new boss, and who has a police force and actual power in the city, and access to a network of assassins. Again, all Boba Fett has is a team of 4. Why does Boba Fett believe that killing Bib Fortuna was such a big accomplishment? I don't know. But for some reason, everyone's going along with it. I mean, really, what the hell is this? Here we are on a poor backwater planet, where almost everyone's struggling to find water, including these assholes. And the locals live low-key lives, scraping to get by. Everyone except the Power Rangers. They're a street gang who have to steal for food and water, but can afford designer clothes that no one else has in the area. Again, can't afford food or water, but each own a designer moped with colorful paint jobs. And then we have their cybernetic implants. Each member of this gang choosing to have a body part amputated and replaced by a robot part. The show treats the guy who performs these mods as kind of a tattoo artist, but we're talking about serious medical procedures that must cost a fortune. Where would these idiots, who again can't afford food and water, get the money to replace perfectly good body parts? I can see the mods being a thing in the underbelly of Coruscant. In fact, I think they'd fit perfectly there. But on Tatooine, they stand out like a sore thumb, and their existence doesn't make any sense. These are poor street kids living on a desert planet, yet everything about them would make living on that planet harder. Not to mention, you'd have to be rich to afford all this stuff. And most importantly, they look stupid and don't fit into Star Wars. I mean, what moron came up with these guys? Oh yeah, that explains it. Apparently, Boba Fett isn't the badass we thought he was. And Return of the Jedi was an accurate depiction of Boba Fett's fighting ability. Boba Fett loses almost every single fight he's in this show. First, a Tusken child beats him. Then he gets beat by a Tusken warrior. Then a group of assassins surround him and attack him, and he has to be saved by his Gamorreans and Fennec Shand. Then Black Chrysanthemum beats Boba Fett up in his own house while he's taking a bath. And this time, the Power Rangers save him. I think the only fight Boba Fett wins in this show was in the end against Cad Bane. But the only reason he was able to win that fight was because Cad Bane was monologuing. I think it's hard to still think of Boba Fett as a badass after this show. Not only is Boba Fett a wuss in this show, he's a complete moron, with no plans or strategies. Every good idea in this show comes from Fennec Shand. And every idea Boba has, he's laughed at and told to change it. And he does. With the way this show goes, Boba Fett should be Tony Soprano. Ruthless and cunning. Instead, he's Forrest Gump. Moronically walking through the world and stumbling into things. Here are some examples. Boba Fett is enslaved and forced to do manual labor. But the only things guarding him are a dog, who we already saw him beat up, and a little kid, who he can obviously outpower. This is Tatooine, a planet he knows, and his ship and all his belongings are just a few miles away. Yet he decides to just sit and take this abuse, instead of taking the opportunity he has to break free, go get his weapons, and come back and exact revenge, like the Boba Fett I know would. We even see Boba Fett walk off to a local bar, beat up a local gang, and steal their speeders. So we know there's civilization within walking distance. But instead of taking this opportunity to escape, he brings the people that tortured him gifts, and teaches them to use that gifts so they can better torture and enslave people. He even earns the Tuskens' trust enough to get a bantha and walk off on his own. At any point, Boba Fett could have been free and flying around the galaxy. But instead, he keeps going back to the Tuskens. Like a moron. But Mr. Lot, Boba Fett kept going back to them because he fell in love with their culture and the people, and wanted to live amongst them. You mean to tell me that you believe that the ruthless bounty hunter Boba Fett fell in love with the culture that brutally beat and enslaved him? Now I think you're a moron. Next we have Boba Fett's armor. He crawls out of the Sarlacc pit and removes his armor himself. But for some reason he forgot he did this and thinks he left his armor inside the Sarlacc. So the moron decides to fly Slave 1 right up to the Sarlacc pit and take a look, as if his armor just be sitting there stuck in between the Sarlacc's teeth. And then, oh no, surprise! The Sarlacc attacks the ship. Who could have predicted that? While Boba Fett sits there in shock, not knowing what to do, Fennec Shand launches a depth charge into the Sarlacc, killing it. Once again showing that Boba Fett is useless. Then Boba Fett leaves his ship and lowers himself into the Sarlacc to take a look around. Did he think a large desert wind blew his armor into the Sarlacc pit? Or did he just not have any memory of removing his armor? Either way, a freaking moron. Then there's Boba Fett's lack of tactical brilliance. As I said earlier, most intelligent plans and strategies come from Fennec Shand, and Boba Fett is easily swayed by a suggestion. For example, while preparing for the final battle, Boba Fett makes the decision to hold up in Jabba's palace, a heavily fortified fortress that would give them the advantage and reduce any collateral damage. But this naive little amputee said no. You need to show the people of Tatooine that you're here to protect them by fighting a large battle on top of their homes and businesses. And Boba Fett agrees. They fight a disadvantaged battle where innocent people die and their property gets destroyed. I'm sure the townspeople really appreciate that. Looks like Fett employs morons, as well as being one himself. And when the Pike Syndicate sends in 2 battle droids, with ray shields, does Boba Fett go get Slave 1? A ship that can easily take these droids out, with minimal casualties and damage? No. Fett makes the intelligent decision to go get his Rancor. I mean, who could have predicted that the Rancor would cause more death and destruction than any of the combatants in the battle? Sure, it tears apart the battle droids, but it also turns on our heroes and tries to eat Jin Djarin. When measuring risk versus reward, I think this was a bad idea. But then, every idea Boba Fett has in this show is a bad idea, because he's a freaking moron. So let me get this straight. After Jabba the Hutt is killed, the rest of the Hutts leave one of the largest criminal organizations in the hands of Bib Fortuna. And for 5 years, they don't come and claim their family's business. Not until Fortuna is killed. They wait till a ruthless bounty hunter has claimed the business before they show up and say it's theirs. And when Fett doesn't agree, the Hutt send an assassin to kill him. And when that doesn't work, the Hutts give Boba Fett a Rancor and tell him that he can have the business. And then they leave Tatooine. Just like that. Now I know people are saying that they left so that the Pike Syndicate and Boba Fett could have it out. And then they'll fight the winner. But the fact that the Hutts are so powerful means that this doesn't make any sense. Neither does leaving one of the largest crime organizations in the galaxy to a bounty hunter, or Bib Fortuna for that matter. Doesn't make any sense. So about the 8th episode of the Book of Boba Fett, they show the first 2 episodes of Season 3 of The Mandalorian. He takes a bounty hunter job that leads him to his old coven, learns about the Darksaber, and builds himself a new ship. Then he goes to visit Grogu, kind of cheapening the emotional goodbye at the end of Season 2 of The Mandalorian. We get to see Ahsoka to remind us that she's got a show coming out. And of course, creepy Luke Skywalker. And some of the training he's given Grogu. And later, we get to see the reunion of Mando and Baby Yoda. But none of it has anything to do with Boba Fett or what they're doing in this show. It just reminds us how much better The Mandalorian is than the Book of Boba Fett. The problem with Cad Bane is his wasted potential. He should have been a much larger part of this story. But in the Book of Boba Fett, if you haven't seen the Clone Wars, Cad Bane is just a cool-looking background character with little real significance. Sound familiar? But except for a few hints at having a shared past with Boba Fett, the role Cad Bane plays could have just as easily been played by a notorious gunslinger from the Pike Syndicate. Other than fan service, Cad Bane didn't need to be here, and was completely wasted. Imagine if they brought Cad Bane in at the beginning of the show, as the main antagonist. Throughout the season, he'd be a thorn in Boba Fett's side, outsmarting Fett, using the knowledge he has from their history together. You could have flashbacks of that history, and the tension would build to the final battle. And we'd care about this fight a lot more than we do now. Why and when did Boba Fett decide he was going to kill Bib Fortuna and take over Jabba the Hutt's criminal empire? And when did Boba Fett decide to be such a nice guy? Was it when he was being tortured by the Tuskens? I'd really like to know, because this was a guy who used to disintegrate his bounties, because it was easier than bringing them in alive. Now, he won't even torture an assassin that was sent to kill him. And he walks around the streets of Mos Espa, waving to the citizens and handing fruit to small children. I think Boba Fett got his ambitions wrong. He should have realized he doesn't want to be a crime lord. He wants to be a politician. Why did at most a few hours in the Sarlacc pit change Boba Fett's appearance so much? Look at these photos side by side. Boba Fett lost his neck. Right before Boba Fett went into the Sarlacc pit, he was in his mid to early 30s, and kind of a slender man. When he came out of the Sarlacc, he had aged 30 years, put on about 50 pounds in his chest and neck, and waistline. Apparently, the Sarlacc pit not only digests you over 1,000 years, but it puts you in a whole different body. And why does Boba Fett spend the majority of the show with his helmet off? Most of the fun with Boba Fett was the mystery. And without his helmet on, there is no mystery. He's just a man who's way older than he should be. Boba Fett's helmet should be on at all times. Now I know the answer to my question. It's because Boba Fett is a clone of Jango Fett. And Tamara Morrison played Jango way back in 2002. So it would make sense that Boba Fett looks like Jango. The only problem is, Tamara Morrison was in his 40s in 2002, making him too old to play Boba Fett now. Then. So having him play Fett in his 60s just looks wrong. And it doesn't feel like Boba Fett. You've got 3 better options. Hire a younger actor that looks like Tamara Morrison. Hire a younger actor and keep Boba Fett's helmet on all the time. Or have it be that he was horribly burned from the acid of the Sarlacc pit, so his face is disfigured, and it doesn't matter who you cast. All I know is, this didn't work for me. Well, alright then. Thanks for watching Try Again, the Book of Boba Fett. I hope you enjoyed yourself. There are try-agains for every Star Wars movie on this channel. So if you're bored, go give those a look. And like and subscribe and comment. And hit the notification bell. And piss off.